So we're giving you a little introduction to philosophy, and this is distinguished into 4 questions that come in a certain order, right? And the first question is, what is a philosopher, right? And the second question is, what is philosophy? And the third question is, what are the kinds and parts of philosophy? And the fourth question will be, how should one come into philosophy? Okay. Now the question, what is a philosopher? We saw that the original and true, I think in full sense of the word, is a lover of wisdom. And then we examined what wisdom is and saw that it's a knowledge of causes and at the end a knowledge of the very first cause. And that it's looking knowledge, right? And it's liberal or free, and it's not really human possession, but it's the best and most honorable knowledge because it's the most divine knowledge. And we saw that the philosopher has to love wisdom for its own sake. More than anything else he loves for its own sake, and therefore he must love it as the end or purpose of his life. And he must love it as a common good, both the common good of reason and the common good of mankind. Now the second question we took up was, what is philosophy? And perhaps the first answer you should give is that philosophy is a methodos, knowledge over a road, that knowledge that follows a road. And by road we mean an order, right? The before and after in our knowledge. And the reason why philosophy is a methodos is that it's a work of reason. And in every work of reason you find order. And because that's what philosophy is, you could say it involves 2 ways it can be had. One is to have a knowledge of the road to follow, and the other is to go down that road, right? And to go down that road to its end, and the mind comes to a halt or a stop. Then you have episteme, which I translate into English as a reasoned out knowledge, a reasoned out understanding. But you could say that in the beginning, it's not a reasoned out knowledge, but a search, an investigation. It's a thesis, as Aristotle says in Greek, or an historia, meaning investigation. But in the end, it's a reasoned out knowledge. Now there are 3 kinds of philosophy. 2 chief kinds, which are looking philosophy, whose end is to understand, and practical philosophy, or the philosophy of doing, whose end is to do, right? And then there's a 3rd kind of philosophy, which is the tool more philosophy, and that is logic. Okay? And we saw that looking philosophy has 3 parts. Mathematical philosophy, and then natural philosophy, and then what Aristotle usually calls first philosophy or wisdom. And likewise, practical philosophy has 3 parts. Ethics, which is about the good of the individual, man. Family, which is domestics, which is about the good of the family. And then political philosophy, which is about the good of the city or the nation. And what one should do. And then you have logic, as we mentioned. Now we say that these 7 are parts of philosophy. We don't mean part now in the sense of original sense of part, but composes a whole, right? We mean what they call subject parts, right? Okay. Each of these is a reasoned out knowledge, right? Each of these is knowledge over a road. So geometry is a reasoned out knowledge of continuous quantity. That is of lines and angles and figures, right? And arithmetic in the Greek sense, is a reasoned out knowledge of numbers. And natural philosophy is a reasoned out knowledge of natural things. And wisdom, you'll find out, is a reasoned out knowledge of what is. Completely universal. And likewise, ethics is a reasoned out knowledge of human happiness and the purpose of human happiness and so on, the virtue. And likewise, the domestics of political philosophy are reasoned out knowledges of the family and of the city. Huh? Okay. And logic is a reasoned out knowledge, we'll see, about definition and statement and argument, or syllogism. Okay. Now the fourth, one other thing there. We also distinguished briefly the roads in our knowledge. And we'll be coming back to these roads at various times. But there are three roads in our knowledge that come in a certain order, at least in our looking knowledge. And the first road is made by nature. And that's the road from the, senses into reason. And then the other roads are made by reason. And there's the common road of reason, the road of reason as reason, which is the road from reasonable guesses to or towards reasoned out knowledge. Huh? And then there's the private road of each reasoned out knowledge. Okay? We'll say some more today about the natural road, but the road of reason as reason, we'll be talking about that when we begin logic, right? And as we start, say, natural philosophy, we'll talk about the private roads and the 7 or 8 elements that are found in every private road. Huh? Okay?
How did you put it with geometry? It's reasoned out knowledge of
continuous quantity.
Continuous, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Quantity is divisible forever. It's quantity whose parts are made at a common boundary, like a line or a surface or a three-dimensional continuum. Okay. Now the fourth question was, how should one come into philosophy? Huh? And one can answer with the brevity of wisdom in one sentence how you should come into philosophy. You should come into philosophy from its natural beginnings through the use of reason. Okay? So we want to ask then, what are the natural beginnings of philosophy? And secondly, why should one come into philosophy from those natural beginnings? And then we have to ask what reason is, what it is to use reason, and why one should come into philosophy through the use of reason. Okay? Well, it's almost obvious that philosophy is work of reason. Okay? So, now at the natural beginnings, it's a thickest piece of chalk I ever used.
Isn't that funny?
And how clear this will, how distinct this will be. Now, what are the natural beginnings? Natural beginnings of philosophy. Unfortunately, the table board doesn't see the blackboard, or a green board is something called. Okay. Now, some of these natural beginnings are in desire. Okay. Others are in our knowledge. Now, there are two main beginnings in our desire. And one is wonder. And you saw maybe those readings from Plato and Aristotle, where they say that in the beginning and now men begin to philosophize out of wonder, right? And the wonder could be defined as the natural desire to know, right, put parentheses for its own sake, right, the cause. Okay. So natural desire to know, for its own sake, the cause. And you see that expressed in that fragment of Democritus. I would rather discover one cause than be master of the kingdom of the Persians. To the greatest king in the world at that time, right? Now, in the passage where Socrates talks about wonder, you see the questions what and why. And you could also define when there is a natural desire to know what and why. Okay. So you see the question what there in the words of Theaetetus and why there in Socrates. And you see the little childhood rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Okay. Now in one of the books of logic, in fact, the center of logic, the second book of the Posterior Analytics of Aristotle, he shows that both the question what and the question why are looking for the cause. And sometimes these two questions differ only in arrangement. What is an eclipse of the sun? It's the cutting off of the light of the sun by the moon coming between the earth and the sun. Why is the light of the sun eclipsed suddenly today? Because the moon has come between, right? The two. So, both of these questions, what and why, are answered by knowing the cause. Later on in logic, we talk about definition, which answers the question what it is, and demonstration, which answers the question why. But definition and demonstration are very closely related. As Aristotle will point out, sometimes a definition is the beginning of a demonstration, sometimes it's the conclusion of a demonstration, sometimes it differs from a demonstration only by arrangement. And so these two definitions are equivalent, right? Okay. Now this is more the beginning of looking philosophy than a practical philosophy. Because we're talking here about the natural desire to know, I'm going to add this in parentheses, for its own sake. Not for the sake of doing or making something. While in practical philosophy, you're seeking knowledge not for its own sake, but for the sake of doing, right? Okay? For the sake of living well, right? Doing well. So the natural desire behind practical philosophy doesn't have a name, but it's the natural desire to live well. Okay? Man has a natural desire to not only to live, but to live well, right? So in ethics, we're asking, when is an individual human being living well, right? And in domestics and in political philosophy, when is the life of the family good, right? And when is the life of the city or the nation good? Huh? So these are the two fundamental natural beginnings of philosophy in our desire. But one, as I say, is more the beginning of looking philosophy, the other more practical philosophy. Incidentally, I might make a little theological footnote. One of the major differences between philosophy and theology is that in philosophy, looking philosophy and practical philosophy are two different kinds of philosophy, right? Okay, two different kinds. Now, in theology, you have sometimes people talk about dogmatic theology, right? And they'll talk about moral theology, right? And in the definition of, say, infallibility there in Vatican I, they'll speak of the Pope as having infallibility in matters of faith and morals, right? But dogmatic theology and moral theology are not two kinds of theology, not two different knowledges. They're really one and the same. So what is divided into philosophy is one in theology. And the reason for that is that in theology you're sharing in God's knowledge itself. And God's knowledge, like everything in God, is altogether what? One and simple. So in God there's not two kinds of knowledge, right? Okay? But his one knowledge is both chiefly theoretical, but also practical. And so theology is sharing in God's knowledge. So there's only one theology. Okay? So don't think of dogmatic and moral theology, although there's some likeness to this distinction, right? It's not a distinction of two theologies, there's only one theology. Okay? But there's two quite distinct kinds of philosophy. And that's because of the human level, right? He's going to proceed quite differently. Now, there are also two natural beginnings of philosophy in our knowledge. And one we met already, and that is the natural road in our knowledge. The road from the senses into what? Reason. Okay? And maybe after we finish this, we'll say a few more words about that, okay? Now, the other natural beginning in our knowledge is what you might call the natural understanding of the axioms and their parts. Now, if you read a little bit of Euclid there, you may see that he distinguishes between the postulates, which are private to geometry. Like among the postulates is the statement that all right angles are equal, right? And that's private to geometry to talk about right angles. But then the postulates are more general statements, right? Like the whole is larger than one of its parts, right? Quantities equal to the same equal to each other. Now, the axioms in this context here means the statements that are known through themselves. They're not statements that are proven by other statements. They're statements known through themselves and by all men. Like the whole is larger than one of its parts. As I often say in class, if anybody thinks the whole is not larger than the part, we'll give him a part of his salary this week, right? Or give him a part of his dinner, right? Or a part of the car he bought, right? Since he sees no difference between the part and the whole. And he'll rave and rant, and you know that he's lying when he says he doesn't know the whole is more than the part, right? Okay? So there are some statements that are known to themselves by all men, and these are called the axioms, right? And it almost seems like we're born knowing them, but actually we naturally, I think, come to know them, right? Through our common experience. Once we see whole and part, and we naturally understand what a whole and a part is, or come to understand what a whole and a part is, and it's obvious that a whole is more than a part, right? And these statements underlie all reasoned out knowledge. As we pointed out before, if you understood nothing before reasoning, you'd have nothing to what? Reason from, right? Okay. So there must be some statements that are known naturally before you reason. And that's what the axioms are. And these are also, you could also reason that the through itself is before and a cause of what is through another, right? What is so through itself, right, is before and a cause of what is so through another. Take, for example, sweet, right? Sugar seems to be sweet through itself, right? Sugar through being sugar is sweet. Is coffee sweet through being coffee? No. If coffee is sweet, it's sweet through another, right? So if the coffee is sweet, but it's not sweet through itself, there must be before it something that is what?
Sweet through itself.
Yeah. Okay. In the same way with statements, right? If some statements are known through other statements, there must be some statements before them that are what? Known to themselves. And that's what we call the... actually, Boethius distinguishes between the statements known to themselves by all men, which are the axioms, and the statements known to themselves by those who are learned in some science. So if you know, for example, in arithmetic what a odd number is and what an even number is, it's obvious that no odd number is even, right? Okay. If you know from geometry what an obtuse angle is and what an acute angle is, it's kind of obvious that an obtuse angle is greater than an acute angle. But not maybe everyone would know that, right? peasant might not know that, right? But he'd know what a hole in a part is, right? So these are the statements naturally known. Huh? They're naturally come to know. So these are the four natural beginnings of philosophy. Two of them in desire, and two of them in our knowledge. Huh? Maybe we've said enough here about what wonder is, and this is fairly obvious here, this natural desire to live well. Huh? Okay. Let's come back a bit, though, to the natural road in our knowledge, right? And speak a little bit more about that road. Huh? Now, as I said before, when you speak of a road in our knowledge, you mean an order in our knowledge. An order means a before and after, right? So if you want to understand the natural road in our knowledge, you have to see the before and after in that road. Okay? Now, there's two before and afters you can see in that road, and they somewhat correspond to each other, but they should be considered separately because each brings out something more. So you can speak of a before and after in kinds of knowing along this road, from the senses into reason. And you can speak of a before and after in things as known along this road, right? Now, in Aristotle's Premium to Wisdom, he took up the natural road a bit in order to see better what wisdom is aiming at. Remember that? Okay. And he gave us something of the order, right, of different kinds of knowing along that road. The road from the senses into reason. Well, obviously what comes first along that road is sensing. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. So sensing comes before anything else along that road. And then Aristotle pointed out that in man, and in fact in higher animals, sensing gives rise to something called memory. Okay? We remember something of what we sense, right? I can't remember anything before my 5th birthday about when I was in kindergarten, right? I remember anything before that. But I remember all kinds of things from the past, right? Okay. So sensing comes before memory. Okay. After memory, if you recall in Aristotle's treatment there comes what we call experience now, but experience in the sense of a collection of many memories of the same sort of thing. Huh? Okay. So experience comes third. Huh? Experience in the sense of a collection of many memories of the same sort of thing. Now, it's after experience that you start to get a knowledge of the universal, right? Which is something proper to reason. And because in experience you see many individuals of the same kind, and you have brought them together, and you start to see what they have in common. And you separate out what they have in common, you now have a knowledge of the universal. So as a little child, your mummy said, "See the dog in the yard?" And that was an individual dog that you sensed, right? And maybe you remember something of what you sense. The next day, there's another dog, and you said, "See that dog, right?" Okay? And gradually, you're picking up memories, right? Sensing, and many memories. And eventually, you're starting to get an experience of dogs, right? But then someday the little child will look out the window on his own and say, "Mommy, a dog." See? He separated out what's common to those many, right? And now he recognizes this new individual, right, as coming under this universal, right? Okay? So, sensing, memory, and experience are all a knowledge of the what? Singular. But after that, I'm going to go down to the end here now, right? Okay? You start to have this knowledge of the universal. What comes first is that natural understanding we spoke about. Okay? The natural understanding of these very basic universals like whole, part, and so on. Okay? And from that and other things, we come to a reasoned out understanding of things. Huh? Reasoned out knowledge. Statement. Reasoned out understanding, or you could call it a reasoned out knowledge. Huh? And after many forms of reasoned out understanding, like geometry and arithmetic and natural philosophy and ethics and domestics and political, comes wisdom, right? And when you study wisdom, you'll see that it perfects both natural understanding and reasoned out understanding. It's really a kind of unique thing. Huh? So wisdom is going to come here at the very end. Huh? So that's something of the order there, the before and after, different kinds of knowing along this road. Sensing comes before memory, memory comes before experience. Experience comes before any knowledge of the universals. But among the universal comes this natural understanding of these very general things like whole and part. And then a reasoned out understanding, and there being many forms of reasoned out understanding. And you can distinguish the order among them. And at the very end comes what? Wisdom, right? Okay. Yeah.
Wisdom, are we to understand metaphysics as Aristotle speaks of? Or is this
Yeah, Aristotle usually calls it first philosophy. Metaphysics comes from Andronicus of Rhodes, right? Who saw that these books come after the books in natural philosophy. And so if you look at the Greek, it's actually three words. Meta, meaning after, ta, which is the article, phusika, meta ta phusika, after the books in natural philosophy. And if you ever, get even the Random House, the basic books of Aristotle, you'll see that they place the metaphysics after the books in natural philosophy. See? Because in the order of learning it comes after, right? Okay. Okay. Transphysica, as they say in Thomas, right? Cross or after the natural books. Huh? Okay. Now, there's also a before and after in things as known along this road. Okay. And there you can distinguish two before and afters. Huh? You can distinguish the order, before and after, the order in which different things are known along this road. Okay. And then the order in which the same thing is known. Along this road. Okay. In other words, because of this natural road, because of the order made by nature in our knowledge, we're going to know some things before other things. Okay? But also because of that natural road, we're going to know the same thing in different ways, and in one way before another way. Okay? Now let's talk about the first one, the order in which different things are known. Well, you can begin with something very obvious and very general, right? and that is that sensible things are known before things that cannot be sensed. Okay? That's kind of obvious, right? If you're going on the road for the senses and to reason, obviously sensible things, things that can be sensed, right, are going to be known before things cannot be sensed, right? Okay. And you could add to that, of course, obviously things that are more sensible will be known before things that are less sensible, right? Okay. But now, under this idea, we're going to distinguish three befores. I'm going to do them in an ascending order from the particular more to the what? General, right? Okay. Material things are going to be known before immaterial things. Okay. That's kind of obvious, huh? And that's why natural philosophy, which is about material things, right, comes before wisdom, which is about immaterial things. Okay? And of course, the very first philosophers only knew about material things. Huh? And it's not until Anaxagoras and then Plato and Aristotle himself that the Greek philosophers started to have reasons to think that there exist immaterial things. Okay? So in the beginning, they knew only material things, and they thought of everything as being material, right? And it's only by reasoning that they arrived at the idea that there exist immaterial things. And then they realized there's some knowledge after, metatausika, right? After the study of the actual things. Okay? So that's comes under this, okay? Now, a second thing which is even more universal than this, right? One way we get from material things to the existence of immaterial things is because the immaterial things are in some way causes of material things. And so we reason from the effects in the material world to the causes in the immaterial world. Huh? But this is true not only in going from the material world to the immaterial world, that we tend to go from the effect towards the cause, but even in the natural world, right? Even in the material world, the effect is, for the most part anyway, more known to us than the what? Cause. Huh? So this is a little more general than going material before immaterial. Right? Effects is usually known before cause. Huh? Okay. And notice the reason for that is that the senses are more a knowledge of effects than of causes. Take, for example, day and night, right? Take an effect that we see every day, right? Day and night, huh? The ancients knew there was day and night as well as we know there's day and night, right? But there's some disagreement. Is day and night caused by the sun going around the earth? Or is day and night caused by the earth turning on its axis? Right? It's not obvious which one it is it? Okay? And the fact that they disagreed, or people have disagreed historically, right, as to the cause of day and night, right, while agreeing that there is day and night, is a sign that the effect, right, day and night, is more known than whatever its cause is. Huh? Okay? Have you ever drunk alcoholic beverages, right? You may have had experienced a certain effect of the alcoholic beverage upon you, right? Huh? See? But why does alcohol have that effect? You know, it's kind of hidden from us, isn't it? And you ask a chemist, for the formula of alcohol, and it still doesn't tell us why alcohol has that effect, right? Okay? Or we notice that trees grow, right? But why do they grow, right? That's hidden, right? And notice the question why, which we often ask, right? Every time we ask the question why, that's a sign that we know the effect before the cause, right? Okay? We see an effect, but we don't know its cause, and we ask why. Right? Okay? So the historians will agree that there was a French Revolution, but they will disagree sometimes as to why there was a French Revolution, right? Okay? And we often know what people do, but we're puzzled as to why they did it, right? And we often are mistaken as to why people did this or did that, right? Even though we're pretty sure that they did it. Okay? And see how that's a little broader than material before the immaterial. Because not only are immaterial things causes of material things, and so when you go from material things to immaterial things, that's one way of going from effects to causes. But even in the material world, right, there are causes too. Okay? And even there, we tend to know the effect before the cause. Huh? Okay? Einstein, was trying to find out why stones fall to the ground. And a lot of people think, that Sir Isaac Newton answered the question with gravity or something like that, right? When they actually go and read the text of Sir Isaac Newton, he says, I don't know why they fall to the ground. And it's the editor who made it appear as if Newton had discovered why stones fall to the ground. Mm-hmm. But Newton himself was in no doubt that he didn't know. Mm-hmm. And when Einstein went to England and gave a talk on Newton, right, he said what he admired in Newton was more his knowing what he didn't know than what he did know, right? There's a famous remark of Newton that I don't know what I may have appeared to have been to other people, right? But to myself, I seem to be like a little boy playing with the seashells on the seashore, right? Or the whole vast ocean of truth lay out there, undiscovered, See? But the people came after Newton, the poets say, all was dark, and God said that Newton be and all was light. But Newton himself doesn't have that what? Yeah, he doesn't have that ignorance of his own ignorance, right? So Einstein was trying to find out, is it? But no, that's something that's very common, right? The stones fall to the ground. But here Einstein's saying Newton didn't know. Newton says, I don't know, right? And Einstein was trying to find out why they do. Okay? Now notice, you could reason from this too as to why wisdom comes last, right? And wisdom is a knowledge of the first cause, right? And you know the effect before the cause, right? Sometimes the cause has a cause, right? But you know the cause before you know the cause of the cause, right? So if we, for the most part, go from the effect towards the cause, then a knowledge of the first cause would come at the end of our knowledge, right? As we were saying before, would be the order in our knowing, right? Okay? But you could also see that because we know material things. And mathematics, like natural philosophy, is about material things, but you define them without using this concrete matter, right? This is extension. Well, wisdom is about immaterial things. If there are not immaterial things, there'd be no wisdom other than natural philosophy. Natural philosophy would be wisdom. Okay? So from both of these, you can see why wisdom comes last in the order of learning, right? Now, the third thing is going to generalize this. The cause tends to be simpler than the effect. Okay? And in fact, when you study God, the first cause, you find out that God is the simplest thing there is. If you ever looked at the Summa Theologiae, question 2 in the Prima Pars is on the existence of God, right? Question 3 is on the what? Simplicity of God. Okay? So, decompose is known before the simple. Okay. So the last thing we know is God is the simplest thing there is. Yeah, something like that in physics. And they talk about, all the great physicists talk about the principle of simplicity, right? How the fundamental equations are simple, right? And the father of modern physics there, Max Planck, said, right? The more universal an equation is, the simpler it is. Okay? But if you look at Einstein's lecture there at Columbia there, where he has students as well as professors in the audience, and he says simple doesn't mean easy. In other words, the equations of relativity theory are very simple, but not easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Then you count the time when relativity theory came out, and at West Point there, the professor was supposed to teach relativity theory one day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he came into class, and he called upon Douglas MacArthur, who was a student at the time, right? And it was the brightest student in the class, right? He says, Cadet MacArthur, do you understand this? MacArthur said, no, sir. And the professor said, neither do I. Class dismissed. Okay? But notice, God is the simplest thing there is, but he's the hardest thing to really understand. Huh? But notice, you'll notice even in mathematics, we define the simple by the composed. Just think of the definition of body, the definition of surface, the definition of line, and the definition of what? Point. A body is that which has length, width, and depth, right? There are three affirmative things in the notion of body, right? A surface involves one negation. A surface has length and width, but no depth. But the surface is simpler than the body, right? Then you go to the line. The line has length, but no width and no depth. Two negations, right? The point has position, but neither length nor width nor depth. Euclid defines the point, as you may have seen in the geometry there, that which has no parts. See? In other words, you're defining that which is simple and has no parts by the negation of what is composed and has parts. Okay? And even when something is grammatically affirmative, like we say God is simple, right? But when we show in theology that God is simple, we show that he's not composed in any way. So it's really understanding the simple by the negation of the composed. It's like we tend to come to know the cause and the effect, so we know the simple through the composed. Okay? So, in general, then you can say along this road, sensible things are known before things cannot be sensed. It's kind of obvious. More sensible before the less sensible. But then under that you can bring out these things, that material things are known before immaterial things. Effects are usually known before causes. And composed things are known before what? Simple things. I'm going to erase this so I can have room to talk about the order in which the same thing is known, right? Okay? So this now is the order in which the same thing is known. Along this road now, from the senses into reason, right? Now the first thing is pointed out by the great Berquist, right? And this statement of Berquist in the Consolation of Philosophy is repeated down through the whole Middle Ages, right? Berquist says, a thing is singular when sensed, but universal when understood. A thing is singular, individual, right? When sensed, and universal when understood. me give you a simple example of that. The chair that I see with my eyes, which is one of my senses, or that I feel with my hand, which is involving sense of touch, right, is an individual chair, right? This singular chair, right? But when I understand what this is, I'm understanding what a chair is, right? And what a chair is something what? Common to many, said of many, something universal. Okay? Now, when Socrates asks somebody, what is something, right? They invariably give examples of the thing. Okay? If I had a little child in this room, right, and I asked this little child, what is a chair? What do you think he'd do? That's a chair. That's a chair. What is a nose? That's a nose. That's a nose, right? Okay? You wouldn't expect him to come out with a definition of what a chair is, would you? Okay? It would take some time to really, define what a chair is. Huh? You might begin by saying a chair is something to sit on, but so is a bench, right? So is a saddle, right? But something to sit on for one person, There's everything to sit on for one person, a chair, a saddle for one person too, It take you a while to think out, as we say, the definition of what? That, okay? So what invariably happens is that they give examples of something, and then Socrates tells them, well, you're giving me too much. I want what's common to all of these, right? Okay? And then they try to frame universal definition, right? But that's something natural, you see. When my children went to kindergarten, they'd come home with a piece of paper and have a circle on it, and a square on it, and a triangle on it, and they say, Daddy, this is a circle, that's a square, that's a triangle, right? But if you ask a little child, what is a circle? You wouldn't say it's a plane figure contained by one line every 4 years. You point to the clock or something else that's circular, right? Say, that's a circle, right? So it's natural to give examples of a thing before defining it, right? And in fact, as we'll see in logic, there is a road from examples to the definition. When I want to define, for example, what a Shakespearean sonnet is, right? I read a number of individual sonnets, right? And I compare those sonnets, right? And I try to separate out what they have in common. And the more I think about them and compare them, the more I see they have in common. They have a certain number of lines, and I look carefully and count the lines. I might see they all have in common 14 lines, right? And then I start to notice other things. There's a meter there and so on, right? And I'm gradually thinking out the definition of a Shakespearean sonnet by what? Comparing the examples of it, right? Okay? This is a chair, that's a chair, and so on. What does this and that have in common, right? Okay? So there's a road from examples to the definition. Okay? But it's natural to begin with examples before the definition. Now in reasoning, you have something like that the universal statements from which the syllogism proceeds, they are usually established by some kind of what? Induction, right? Now, induction is an argument from many singulars to the what? Universal, right? Why the syllogism begins with something universal and the reasons from that, right? So just as people give examples of a thing before they define it, before they give the universal definition of it, right? So induction comes for us before what? Syllogism, right? So in the Phaedo, for example, Socrates makes an induction, and then when he gets the universal statement to induction, he reasons by syllogism to the immortality of the soul. Okay? This is one of the reasons, too, why Aristotle said wisdom is so difficult, because it's the most, what? Universal science, right? So in some ways, the furthest away from the senses. And if you ever had the misfortune to teach philosophy, you'll have students saying, oh, this is so abstract, right? But in a sense, they're talking about it's universal, right? and therefore it's not, it's kind of remote from senses, which I did in the senior, right? Okay. Now the second thing is, for the most part you can say, we know things in an outward way before inwardly. Okay? Now notice in English, outward is almost a synonym for what? Sensible, right? I remember as a child the definition of sacrament, an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace, right? But outward meant that it was something what? You could sense, right? So when you meet somebody else for the first time, right, you know them in a kind of what? Outward way, right? You don't know them in an inward way, do you? See? But as you talk to them and listen to them, right, and as you see how they act on the battlefield and other trying circumstances, right, then you begin to know something about what they're like in an inward way, right? Okay. Now, this is especially true in ethics and in natural philosophy, right? In geometry, of course, you're dealing with things on the surface. Plain geometry, right? See? But the senses know things in an outward way. Reason tries to see into them, right? And so we use words like insight for reason, right? We use words like, penetrating, which gets inside of something. We speak of a good mind as being sharp, right? Okay? But having insight into things, can see into them, right? So this is again very important in logic because when we ask what something is, we tend to draw a line around that thing and know it in a kind of outward way before we know it what? Inwardly, right? Okay. Give an example of that, right? Aristotle's taking up virtue there in the end of the first book of the Nicomachean Ethics, and then later on in the second book he really define it, right? But he begins by saying virtue is a praiseworthy quality. Okay? Now what kind of a notion of virtue is that? Is it an inward or outward knowledge of virtue?
Outward.
Yeah. Why vice would be a what? Blameworthy, huh? Okay. Notice praise is in the one who's praising, right? So you have a kind of outside knowledge, right? But as a child, certain things, you're told you don't do, and certain things you can do, right? And certain things you're praised for doing, and other things you're criticized for doing, right? So without maybe seeing inwardly why this is good or bad, you have a kind of outside knowledge, right? Okay? Now, again, you can kind of sometimes reason from this outward knowledge to an inward knowledge, right? So you might say, become a moral virtue, it's a praiseworthy quality. But then you say, what is it that's praised, right? Well, in eating, it's the man who doesn't eat too much or too little, right? Okay? So then you start to see more inwardly what virtue is, right? It's a habit in the middle, right? Okay? So you're starting to go from an outward knowledge to more inward knowledge. Huh? And Aristotle's taking up human happiness. He in the Greek he says, because he perigraphe. Graphe means, draw a line around, huh? Peri around. He draws a line, as it were, around this, right? And then he begins to, okay? Sometimes when I talk about wisdom itself, I'll say, well, wisdom is the best knowledge. Okay? Now, what kind of a definition of wisdom is that? Yeah. It doesn't really tell you inwardly what wisdom is, does it? Because best means what? Better than all the rest, right? Okay? But it doesn't even tell you what wisdom is a knowledge of. Right? Okay? But is there, again, like there's a road from the singulars, right, to definition, is there a road from this outward knowledge to an inward knowledge, right? See? If I begin and I say wisdom is the best knowledge, and best means what? Better than all the rest. And then I investigate, well, why is one knowledge better than another, right? See? And maybe I figure out that knowledge of a better thing is better, right? It's better to see the sunset than to see the ash can, right? Okay? It's better to hear Mozart than to hear noise, right? Better to taste wine than to taste vinegar or something, right? Okay? So you might say, well, knowledge of a better thing is what? Better. And therefore you might reason out that knowledge of the best thing is the best knowledge. Okay? Now, if the best thing is God, then wisdom is a knowledge of God, right? See? That's how I proceeded. Wisdom is the best knowledge. And I reasoned out that the best knowledge is the knowledge of the best thing. And then if I know that the best thing is God, then I know that wisdom is the knowledge of God, right? Now I'm starting to get an inward knowledge of what wisdom is. I'm starting to know what wisdom is a knowledge of, right? Starting to know it inwardly, right? But we tend to know it first in a kind of outward way, right? When I come into introduction to philosophy class, I'll often tell them that a philosopher is a lover of wisdom, right? And then I say to them, now, do you think wisdom comes in the beginning, or in the middle, or at the end of our knowledge? And without knowing really much what wisdom is, they all answer, they think it comes at the end, right? Okay? But now I have a kind of an outward knowledge of wisdom, right? Wisdom is the end of human knowledge, what comes at the end, right? Okay? But as I investigate the natural road and see how it goes from effect towards the cause, right? I can begin to guess that wisdom is a knowledge of causes, right? It comes at the end. And not just of any causes, but of the cause of the cause. In fact, a knowledge of the first cause. Huh? You see that? Okay? You see that? Or if I see that we know material things before immaterial things, right? I might guess that the knowledge that comes at the end is a knowledge of immaterial things. Huh? Okay? So, we know things in a outward way before inwardly. Huh? And that's why we have these ways of speaking, too, in English. That is a very good language, English, by the way. We talk about thinking about something, right? And thinking about means you're kind of going, what? Around on the outside, right? So, but later on, you, what? Penetrate to the inside, right? And then you bring out what the thing is, right? Okay. So you're going from the upward to more inward now. Now, the third thing, which is, in a way we're going to something more general as we go on here, right? The third thing is that we know things in a confused way before distinctly. Okay? Now, we'll be coming back to this in the beginning of his 8 books of natural hearing, which they often call the physics. Aristotle talks about this in some detail. He'll give a reason there why this is so, right? And the reason goes back to the fact that both the senses and reason are able to know something before they actually know it. So they're going from the ability to know to actually knowing, right? Now, to know something in a confused way, meaning indistinctly, not necessarily being mistaken, but just in an indistinct way, is in between what? Not knowing it at all and knowing it completely or fully, right? So the human mind, in a way, is like a page on which nothing is written in the beginning, right? As you start to fill the page, you don't go from empty to full at once, do you? But you go from empty to partially, right? And eventually to full, right? So when our mind goes from ignorance, in a sense, to knowledge, right? It has an imperfect knowledge of things at first, right? And to know things in a confused or indistinct way is incomplete, imperfect, right? Before knowing them, what? Distinctly, right? Okay. This is, again, going to be very important in logic because you'll notice in logic, in defining, that we name a thing to define it. And so a child will, to some extent, understand what a circle is. You use the word circle correctly, right? But he's not yet able to define it distinctly in the way a definition does. When I teach the love and friendship course, I come in and ask the students, so what is love? And usually the answer you get is, well, it's a feeling. Okay, well, there is one love that is a feeling, and one love that's an act of will, but even the love that's a feeling, I say, well, so is anger. So is hate, right? See? They have some understanding what love is, right? And the difference between love and hate. When you ask them what is love, they can't what? Spell out distinctly what it is. Okay? Sometimes I ask my colleagues, what is reasoning? They can't define it. And yet they're supposed to be reasoning in all their classes, right?
Teaching it.
Yeah. What is reasoning, right? They don't know. You can't say, right? So, we name a thing before we what? Define it, right? And the knowledge you have when you can name a thing but not define it is what? Confused compared to a definition, right? But when you begin to define, you tend to begin with what in logic is called a genus, a word that says in a general way what something is, right? But in common with many things. And then you have to add what? Differences, right? So if I ask a student out of the blue, I say, what is a dog? They'll begin by saying a dog is a what? Animal, right? Now, a dog is an animal, that's true, right? But animal doesn't distinguish between dog and cat and horse and so on, right? But you actually begin there with the general because that's confused, right? And then you start to add differences, right? It's a four-footed animal, right? Okay. And then because you know things in Albert way, you say it's a four-footed animal with barks or something, right? Okay. So in a definition, the fundamental part is called the genus, which states in general what it is, right? And then you add differences. You're going from the what? Confused towards the what? Distinct, right? Okay. And if you look at the definition, people run into the definition of square, maybe, huh? Okay. Notice the definition of square has three parts to it, huh? It's an equilateral and right-angled what? Quadrilateral. Now, does any one of those three parts of the definition fit just square? No. Square is not the only quadrilateral. There's the oblong, the rhombus, the rhomboid, the trapezium, right? It's not even the only, what? Equilateral quadrilateral. Because the rhombus is equilateral, right? It's not the only right-angled one, right? Okay? So no part of the definition fits just square, does it? But you bring those three together, and all of a sudden what? Yeah. Square is the only quadrilateral that is both right-angled and equilateral, right? Okay? That's kind of interesting, right? It's a little bit like when you give, when to pinpoint the target to bomb or something, right? And so you give the longitude, and you give the what? Latitude, right? But how many other points are on that same longitude? infinity of other ones, right? And how many other points on that same latitude? You know? So how can you pinpoint the target, right, by telling what it has in common with an infinity of other points twice? Sounds crazy, doesn't it? You know? But there's only one point that has both that longitude and that what? Latitude, right? Okay? We do something like the definition, right? We take something that's more universal than what we're defining, right? But the intersection of those universals, right, fits only this, what? One thing, right?
So two infinities cancel each other out in a way.
Well, but they limit, right? You see? There's only one point that has that longitude and that latitude, right? But there's an infinity of points that have the longitude, an infinity of points. You say, how do you get down to one point? You do, though, don't you? It's an amazing thing. Okay? So, this explains all kinds of things about, what, definition, right? Huh? Why we name a thing before we define it. Because you don't need as distinct a knowledge to name a thing as to define it, right? And why, when we define, how we begin with a general thing like animal for dog, right? Okay. So notice, this is a before and after, is knowing one and the same thing, right? Aristotle, when he gets through with all of this, stands back at these two last things we talked about, the before and after, in which different things are known, and the before and after the same things are known, and he sees something they have in common. And that is that what is more known to us, right, is before what is less known to us, right? So the confused is more known to us than the distinct, right? Things are more known to us in an outward way than in an inward way. The singular, more known to us than that. Material things are more known to us than immaterial things. The effects are usually more known to us than causes, right? The composed is more known to us, right? But at the same time, and this is the most subtle thing he sees, that what is more known to us is less fully known. When I know something in an outward way, it's not perfectly known, is it? And when I know something in a confused way, it's imperfectly known, right? But it's more known to us. And so we're more sure about the confused than we are about the distinct. If you give me a glass of red wine to drink, and what is this? What's a dry red wine? To be a little more specific. And the more specific I try to get, the less what? Sure I am, right? I ask the students, how old am I? Am I over 20? Oh yeah, you're over 20, Mr. Berquist. Over 30? Yeah. But as you start to narrow it down, they get less. That's sure I'm in the 50s or the 60s, you know? You know? Now maybe it's like 50s, it's not too sure, you know? I gotta look younger than I am. You didn't see your discount, the dentist this morning. Okay. Or I say, how much do I weigh? Over 100 pounds? Yeah. Over 300? No. But now as you start to get more precise, you get what? Less certain, yeah. Now Descartes was all goofed up on that. Because Descartes, in his discourse on method, right, he identifies certitude with clarity and distinction. And do they go together for us? See? You might think at first, right? Go down Main Street and ask somebody, you know, are you more sure in your clear and distinct knowledge or in your vague and confused knowledge? You'd probably say your clear and distinct knowledge, right? See? But as I try to say more distinctly what this red wine I'm drinking is, right, I become what? Less certain, yeah. How can I be more sure that I'm drinking Cabernet Sauvignon than that I'm drinking a dry red wine? Huh? And how can I be more sure that I'm drinking Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley in particular then I'm drinking Cabernet Sauvignon, right? I can't be. Do you see that? Okay. So that's a little bit about the natural road there beyond what we saw before.
Could you repeat for us those two last thoughts that Aristotle would reflect on those?
He says it very briefly, but expanding a little bit what he says. He says the more known to us,
Okay.
before what is less known to us, right? But what is less known to us is the more known, meaning the more what? Fully or perfectly known. And what is more known to us is the what? Less known, meaning the imperfectly known. Huh? Okay. So Plato and Aristotle would compare our mind to going from darkness towards what? Light, right? Okay. But where it is more, has more light is kind of blinding to us at first. Huh? So when I know I'm drinking dry red wine, I'm more sure that I'm drinking dry red wine than I'm drinking Cabernet Sauvignon, right? What I'm drinking is less known than when I know that I'm drinking what? Cabernet Sauvignon, right? Okay. When I know the effect more by itself than I know it in the light of its cause, right? So we know there's all kinds of diseases they're looking for the causes of, right? Huh? Okay. So we know more of the effect by itself than in the light of its cause. But you don't fully understand the effect until you know the what? Cause, right? Yeah. Okay.
Where does Aristotle discuss that? It's not in the Nicomachean, is it?
No, in the first chapter there of the so-called physics, right? We'll look at that text later on when we start to do some natural philosophy. We're going to do some logic before that. Okay? Okay? But there's something like that in every kind of education. That what comes before for us is imperfect. And what comes after for us is more perfect. And that's because in any kind of education you're developing something, right? So, if you do one of these graduated exercise things, like when I was in Canada, a lot of kids got the 5BX plan from the Royal Canadian Air Force. I still have my copy of the Royal Canadian Air Force, right? Okay. Well, these exercises are graduated, right? So you got to start at your level, right? How many push-ups can I do, right? How many of this or that, sit-ups can I do, and so on, right? And I start at this level, doing so many push-ups, so many things, right? And then I gradually what? Build up, right? Now the first exercises I do are productive of less strength than the ones I do later on. 5 push-ups produces less strength than, let's say, 20 push-ups, right? Or 100, right? But if I tried to do 100, maybe I would physically what? Harm myself, right? Huh? Okay? So 100 push-ups would not be productive of strength more for me. But 100 push-ups are productive of greater strength than 5. You see? Okay? Yeah. And the same thing is true in the education to some extent of the heart, right? What is more lovable to us is less lovable. See, we tend to love the sensible good, right? More than the understandable good, right? Because it's more known to us and so on, right? But it's a lesser good, right? So I love candy before I love wisdom, right? Even though wisdom is a greater good than candy. When I was a little boy, I thought my father a foolish man that he didn't fill the refrigerator with soda, soda pop. Grape soda and root beer and orange, all those wonderful things. And with his money, he could afford to fill the refrigerator with this and drink soda all day long and be a happy man, right? See? And now that I can maybe afford to fill the refrigerator, I don't do this, right? I think there are greater things I can pursue, right? You see? But the soda pop was more lovable to me than wisdom. And the private good is more lovable than what? To us, than the common good, but the common good is more lovable. It's a greater good. You know, in the discussions or conversations between Eisenhower and Zhukov, right, in Berlin after the war, right? And Zhukov was a German, Russian general, right? So general, and he was in charge there in the Russian sector, and he would meet with Eisenhower because he was in charge there. And they talk about the American and the communist system, right? And Zhukov would say to Eisenhower, "Oh, in your economic system, people work for profit, right? See, well, here in Russia, we expect them to work for the economic good of the country. Isn't that much higher than working for your own profit?" Well, Eisenhower was too dumb to know how to answer this. See? Because the point is that the economic good of the country, the common good of the country, is a much greater good than my profit. See? But you begin by loving your own what? Private good more than the common good, right? What's more lovable to you is what? Less lovable. And what is more lovable, what is a greater good, in fact, is less what? To you, yeah. See? And so you have to be led from the private good towards the common good, right? Okay. And of course, when you go back to the Russian system, you realize that they, do in fact appeal to the private good, right? If you're highly productive, we might give you the Order of Lenin or something, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you're stealing goods, we put you to death, right? Mm-hmm. So they do, in fact, appeal to the private good to get people to work in some way for the common good, right? It's just that we do it more efficiently. You see? Profit is, a better way of doing it than getting threatened to be shot or, Okay? So the answer was not that to try to say that the private good of this man or his company is greater or better than the common good of the country. No. You can't defend that. The good of the whole is always greater, huh? But it's more lovable to us, right? And so men have to be led from that, right? So sometimes you see a businessman who's got his own company, he's interested in making a profit and keeping the business going. And he joins, let's say, the Chamber of Commerce, or he joins some civic organization, right? And this is beneficial to his company because he becomes known, he makes all kinds of contacts, right? But as he starts to do things for the city, you find the man begins to get a certain, what? Delight in doing things that are for the good of the city, even apart from his own, what? Yeah. And now he's been morally educated, right? See? In the same way in the Christian life there, we might first be concerned about what? Fires of hell, right? Your own private laws, right? And then you have to be gradually led from that to what? The love of God, right? The love of the common good, huh? Okay. So in the beginning, the sensible good is more lovable to us than the reasonable good, right? And the private good than the common good, because the senses know only the sensible good. That's where our knowledge begins. They know only the private good, huh? So we have to be gradually led on. The same way in education, your taste, right? Whether it be taste in food or taste in the fine arts, right? As a little boy, I was known for always trying to find a march on the radio. And I still love marches, right? But I know now that there's not as much to hear in these marches as there is in a Mozart symphony or a Mozart opera, right? I remember my brother Richard brought home the magic flute, and the first time I heard it, I listened to everything attentively. I didn't hear anything. But I continued to hear these things. Why? So Mozart's music is more hearable than the march, but the march is more hearable by me as a child. Everybody loves a parade, as they say, right? See? Stirring, huh? Notice the child his imagination is going to be struck more by Little Red Riding Hood than by King Lear. But as you continue to read Little Red Riding Hood, you kind of exhaust the story after a while, right? I have kind of. But King Lear, I can still come back to King Lear. And if there's more for the imagination. Used to notice at Christmas time, my mother would put the Christmas cards up over the mantle or the fireplace. And you tend to go down those cards and to stop in the ones that have reproduction of a famous painting. You know? And you keep on seeing more and more in that painting. Right? Or the child will see his own childlike drawing quickly first, right? You won't appreciate the painting, maybe, the famous painting, right? But there's really more to be seen there. It's less seen by us in the beginning. But it's because in all of these, education, you're going from the imperfect towards the perfect, right? You're developing something. So what comes first for us is always, objectively speaking, imperfect. So Plato compares us to men who are born in a cave. There's hardly any light in the cave, and someone gets out of the cave, out into the sunlight, where things are more knowable, right? But he's blinded at first when he gets out there, right? Okay? Like it says in the Bible, God dwells in light inaccessible. He's too understandable, right? Okay? So, now as far as the axioms are concerned, no one has ever tried to enumerate all the axioms, right? Euclid enumerates some that are especially important in geometry, right? And Aristotle talks about the most basic ones, that something cannot both be and not be, right? It must either be or not be, right? But there are many other axioms, like the whole is more than a part. We talked about the word before, didn't we, in here a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
The word before?
Yeah.
Oh,
We did, okay. But nothing is what? Before itself. That's an axiom. Nothing is before or after itself. Today is before tomorrow and after yesterday, but can today be before today? Or after today? So there's many axioms. Nothing is the beginning of itself. As I say, no one has ever tried to enumerate all of them. Aristotle says by nature the most fundamental ones are you can't both be and not be, right? You must either be or not be. To be or not to be, that is the question, right? It's a question because you can't both be and not be, right? You must either be or not be. So as you read the demonstrations in Euclid, you'll see him using these axioms. Even the postulates, in a sense, presuppose the axioms. Take a simple example here. You take the postulate that all right angles are equal, right? Okay. Now, when a straight line meets a straight line and makes equal angles, we call them what? Right angles. That's the definition. And this straight line meets here makes equal angles. Now, how do you know that these angles are what? Equal. Definition doesn't tell you that these two are equal, tells you these two are equal, right? It doesn't tell you this is equal to that one, and so on for every pair, right? And how do you know it isn't like a straight line? You know, you divide a line into equal parts. I've done that, but this is not equal to that, is it? So how do you know that this angle is equal to that angle? Well, you can imagine this line laid on that line, right? At that point, right? Now, if this line here coincides with this line, obviously they're equal, right? If it doesn't, it falls to one side, right? Okay. Now, this angle and this angle here are equal, right? Okay. But now, if you take this angle here, this whole angle here is greater than this part right down here, isn't it? Why? Because the whole is more than a what? Part. That's an axiom, right? Okay. So, if this is equal to this, and this is greater than this, then this is greater than that, right? Okay. Therefore, this, if you add to the greater one, right? This here is greater than this. If you add this, then this is much greater than that, right? But since that is the one that's over there, right? This is also equal to that. What is much greater is also equal. So it both is and is not. That's impossible, right? So you're using the axiom that the whole is more than the part, and something cannot both be and not be, right? Okay. Or take another example here from geometry of how the axiom get together. Euclid defines what? Circle, right? You've seen the definition, I guess, huh? And then he defines diameter, right? Okay. And then he states what really is a postulate, that the diameter bisects the circle, that is to say, divides into equal parts, right? I asked the students, how do you know that the diameter bisects it? I said, well, just by definition. I said, no, that's not the definition of diameter. See, you define a circle, right? Plane figure between the one line, every point which is keep you distant from a point in the interior called the center, okay? And then you say, if you take any point on the circumference, right, and you draw a straight line to the center and two to the opposite, that's what we call a diameter, right? Now, how do you know the diameter divides the circle into two equal parts? Because it says, and it divides into two equal parts. How do you know that?
Maybe the fourth combination?
Huh?
The fourth combination?
Well, again, you can imagine this as it were flipped over on the top of the other side, right? Okay? Now, the base is the same first. Now, when we flip it over, if this coincides with that, then it's obvious that they're equal, right? If it doesn't coincide, it's going to fall either above or what? Below the other. In which case, all the radii are not what?
Equal.
Yeah. That's already the definition of circle, right? So they're both equal and not equal. Impossible, right? So going back to the fundamental axiom, something cannot both be and not be, right? Or if I say in arithmetic, something kind of obvious here, no odd number is even, right? Okay? This is a statement known to itself, we say. It's known to knowing what an odd number is and what even numbers, right? When we define an even number, we say it's a number divisible into two equal parts, right? An odd number is a number not divisible into two equal parts. So if an odd number were to become an even number, right, or to be an even number, that number would both be and not be divisible into two equal parts, right? And that's impossible, right? Okay. So everything rests upon those axioms of being and non-being, right? Now sometimes you have someone who denies these because of something's the fun of it, but sometimes because he runs into some difficulty he can't solve. But notice when they deny for a reason the axiom of contradiction there, something cannot both be and not be. They do so because something seems to contradict it. So they're saying it isn't so because it is so. They're holding on to it when they say something contradicts it. If something contradicts it, you can't hold on to it. So they accept the principle of contradiction, right? They do that. It's but some just denies it for fun. You say, well, you came out to the edge of the cliff, and you say it's the same thing to step forward and not step forward. Same thing for me to pull the trigger, not to pull the trigger, right? And he quickly admits that they're not the same. It's action. So that's the first of the four questions here under the fourth question. What are the natural beginnings of philosophy, right? With two desires, the natural desire to know the cause for its own sake, right? And the natural desire to live well, right? And two, in our knowledge, the natural road, the road from the senses into reason, and we unfolded a bit the before and after along that road, huh? And then the natural understanding of the axioms, right? Okay. Now the next question was, why do you want to come into philosophy from the natural beginnings, right? And let's give some of these reasons here, huh? Give about 10 reasons if we can here, huh? Can't really give more reasons, but I'll give about 10 today. Now the first four reasons I'm going to give are based on the fact that the natural beginnings are beginnings and in fact the very first beginnings, right? Okay? So, first reason. We talked about this, I think, the other day already a little bit. The man who considers something from its beginning will understand it the best. Okay? The man who considers something from its beginning will get the best understanding. Now, I took the simple example there. If I want to understand a man, I'm writing the biography of Winston Churchill, let's say, or some other famous man. I'm going to go back to his what? Beginning, right? His origin, right? I'm going to follow him up from his origin, right? And that will understand him the best, won't I? Okay? If I'm writing the history of a country, I'm going to go back to its what? France, right? Okay. And I mentioned how de Tocqueville said that what? You're in a better position to understand America than France because you can see its beginning, right? How it began, huh? Okay. Well, when de Tocqueville began the famous, profound researches, I guess, really into the French Revolution, right? You know, that first volume he completed, right? You know, leads right up to the French Revolution, right? And the French Revolution seems like a foregone conclusion, you know, for everything he brings out in that volume, right? But he's seeing it from its what? Beginning, right? Huh? Okay. So you're going to understand philosophy best if you follow it up from its what? Beginning, and the natural beginnings are the very what? First beginnings of it. Make sense? Okay. You ever read that famous book of C.S. Lewis, The Allegory of Love? It's really kind of a masterpiece in fiction, right? Huh? And he says, you know, compared to this, the Renaissance is a ripple on the literary history. It goes back to the origin, right? Huh? That led eventually to Shakespeare and Spencer, right? All the way back to the Middle Ages, right? When you see this thing from its beginning, you get a much better understanding of what it is. Medieval romance, what it was. That's an example of the same thing, right? A man who considers something from its beginning will understand it the best. Really, a masterpiece there, they'll very well. Okay. Now, the second, now what Shakespeare's, the ones they call romances, they're the last plays. They go back to the Hellenic romance, huh?
Oh.
But the romantic comedies, the romances in that sense, they go back to the medieval romance. So you follow it up from there, you get, you know, better understanding what these two different forms of plays are. They're different from tragedy and comedy, right? One has its origin in the Hellenic period, and the other has its origin in the medieval. Now, the second thing, there's a connection between beginning and order. Okay? And the connection is that order is based on some beginning. When we order events historically, we take some event to begin with, don't we? We take, for example, the birth of Christ, right? And we order all events by what? Their distance from that event, right? So this is 2001, right? Okay, but the French Revolution began in 1789. The American Revolution began in 1776, maybe, right? Okay. England was conquered by the Normans in 1066, right? We're ordering all these events, but by some what? Beginning, right? If you want to understand the order of an army, or in fact, the order of the federal government, if there is any order there, You go back to the one who's at the beginning of things, right? You go back to the general, let's say, right? And then send the general there, maybe let's say the colonels, none of the colonels, the captains, right? Or you go to the president, and under the president, the different department heads, and then all the way down the line, right? So you order things from the what? Beginning, yeah. You know, often, times you try to remember something, if you go back to the beginning, then you can,
Right, yeah.
yeah, remember things in order, right?
Mhm.
You know? Okay. So since order is based on some beginning, and ordered, as opposed to a disordered approach to philosophy must be from its beginning. Therefore, an ordered approach to philosophy must start from its beginnings. And these being the first beginnings, the natural beginnings and the first beginnings, if you don't come into philosophy from these natural beginnings, you're going to have a disordered approach to philosophy. Okay? And of course, that's inappropriate if philosophy is what? Knowledge over a road, right? That you approach it in a disordered way, right? And if the end of philosophy is wisdom, and the wise man especially knows order, right? It's obviously most inappropriate to approach philosophy in a disordered way. Okay? Now, the third way is suggested by the famous Greek proverb, arche pantemisiu. The beginning is half of all. And it's a proverb that Plato and Aristotle and the other great Greek philosophers often quote. The beginning is half of all. And Plato says, he not only quotes the proverb, the beginning is half of all, but he says, it seems to me to be more than half. Okay? And that's because the beginning is like a what? A seed, right? It contains everything else is in a seed. So although it's small in size, it's great in all that it what gives rise to. Okay. So the beginning is like a what? Seed. Small in size, but great in power. You can say everything else is contained in the beginning, it's in a seed, right? It's in the power of the beginning. And that's why the philosophers say that even a little mistake in the beginning is a great one in the end. You always compare it to a fork in the road, right? You take the wrong turn there, the fork in the road, you're not far from where you should be, but the further you go, the further you'll be from where you should be. So if you begin well in philosophy, you're going to be helped throughout the whole philosophy by this. If you begin badly, you're going to be what? Impeded all the way through philosophy by this. Now a fourth reason, when you study knowledge, you'll find out that knowledge involves two things. Knowledge involves grasping and judging. Okay? So even when you read, say, a philosopher, you have to grasp what the man is saying. You have to understand what he's saying, right? But that's only the beginning. And the culmination is to judge, be able to judge whether what he says is true or false, right? Okay? To separate the true from the what false, right? Okay? Now, that's one of my complaints about some of the modern philosophers, right? They write so obscurely that it takes you a long time to figure out what they're saying, and you have little time left over to judge, right? When the bulk of your time and effort should be taken up in finding out whether what they say is true or false, right? Not what do they mean? And I was teaching at St. Mary's College. I taught there 3 years. When I came out there, Joe there in the department was trying to figure out what Heidegger meant by being, right? 3 years later when I left, he was still trying to figure out what Heidegger meant by being. So the proportions all work. Now, what is judging? Huh? Well, judging is separating the true from the false. I'm running out of space here. Let me just state it. Judging is separating the true from the false by some beginning. Okay? So Euclid will be separating the true from the false by going back to the beginnings of geometry, to the definitions and to the axioms and the postulates, right? Okay. But ultimately your judgments go all the way back to the natural beginnings, because those are the very first beginnings. Okay? So am I sitting or standing?
Sitting.
Now how did you separate the true from the false there? I am sitting is true, you would say, and I am not sitting is false.
We don't know that yet because if we go to that, you could be standing. We don't know what to tell you.
Oh, okay. But no, he's going back to his senses to separate the true from the false, right? Okay? Okay. That's the beginning, right? Okay. When we were talking about those simple, even those postulates in geometry, right? All the right angles have to be equal, right? We went back to the axioms, right? The whole is more than the part, right? And something cannot be both greater than and equal to. Then both be and not be equal, right? Both be greater than and not greater than. Huh? So you go back to some beginning and ultimately to the natural beginnings. So if you don't come into philosophy from the natural beginnings, you're unable to what?
Judge.
To judge, right? Unable to separate the true from the false by the beginning. Okay? Now, the next group of reasons emphasize the fact that these are the natural beginnings, right? The emphasis here is upon nature, right? And following nature, huh?
Okay. The emphasis, was there special emphasis on the first four?
On beginning.
Beginning, yeah.
The
Okay.
importance of the beginning, right? Huh? And these are the very first beginnings, right? So you have 4 reasons there that we Now, gave a whole talk one time out there at Thomas Aquinas College on the royal fragment of Heraclitus, right? But in the royal fragment there, Heraclitus says that wisdom is to speak the truth and to act in accord with nature. Giving ear there too, huh? So, quote the royal fragment as part of it here. Wisdom is to speak the truth and to act in accord with nature, giving ear thereto. Huh? Okay. The idea that nature is what? Wiser than we are, right? Huh? And that's why Aristotle often says that human art imitates nature. Huh? Nature is something of the divine art in things, huh? Put into things, right? So listening to nature in a way, you're listening to God, right? You're learning from the works of God. Huh? Okay. And only a fool would think he's wiser than nature. Okay. Even the greatest scientists, right? You know, they speak of nature as being wiser than we are. Huh? So if you don't come into philosophy from its natural beginning, you're not listening to nature, right? You're not following nature, right? That's a very important reason. Now, think of another thing here. Nature is before what is not by nature, right? It's before being in time, right? In man, let's say. And furthermore, we acquire what is not natural through what is natural. Pretty obvious in our experience that nature is before artificial things in time, right? There are natural things before artificial things. They could be without these artificial things, right? But the artificial things could not be without the natural things. But in the second proposition there, we acquire what is not natural through what is natural. Well, take the ballpoint pen in your hand, or take the hammer or the saw, or any of these artificial tools we have, right? How do we acquire those? Well, basically through our hands, right? And our reason too, right? But our hands and our reason are something we have by what? Nature, right? And it began with a man just taking a rock, maybe, and using it like a hammer, or using it like a, yeah. And then gradually perfecting the tools, right? But all of them through the use of his what? Hands. Huh? So we acquire what is not natural through what is natural, right? So you have to acquire the rest of philosophy through what is natural, right? And I was pointing out there, even the postulates are acquired by what? In some way through the axioms. Huh? Okay? And all of our knowledge in some way is acquired by following the natural what? Road, right? Huh? And all of the philosophizing comes out of wonder and the desire to live well and so on. Huh? Aristotle, in the book about the poetic art, he points out some interesting things about man and imitation. And he says that man is by nature the most imitative of all the animals. There's no animal that imitates as much as man does, huh? Notice how we imitate, I do that for the grandchildren. My own children imitate the cat and the sound the cat makes. I have a very good meow, by the way. It's very convincing, right? And people who don't know me make me fool. Look for the cat. And you had the bird sound, the dog sound, and all the other sounds, the whole farm of animals. And he also points out that, we naturally delight in imitations, right? But also that at first we learn by imitation. Huh? But emphasize the idea that man is by nature the most imitative of animals. So how do we acquire our native language? By imitating our mother and our father and uncles and older brothers and, right? Teachers, right? Okay. Take things like custom, right? And fashion. These are not natural things, right? Things are by custom, by fashion. But how does custom and fashion arise?
You're imitating.
Yeah. Yeah. Both custom and fashion arise because man is an imitative animal, right? The cat doesn't imitate us in these things, right? See? Okay. So all these things that are not natural, they presuppose the natural and they're acquired through the natural. So that's another reason why we have to come in from what is natural into philosophy. Okay? Take another thing. should come in to philosophy from the more known to us, right? Okay? This is something natural to come in from what is more known to us. It should come in from what is more known to us. Huh? What is naturally known is what? More known, right? Okay? What's naturally known is what is most known. Huh? We're most sure about the things we naturally know, right? Now, you might have seen in that little passage I gave you from Thomas there, from the commentary on the Nicomachean Ethics. He speaks of the order of things among themselves and then the order of them to their end. And he sees a certain order among those two orders, which is more fundamental. The order of many things to their end, or their order among themselves, which is more fundamental.
To the end.
Yeah. You take the example of a chair, right? You might have a seat and legs and a back and so on, right? And there's an order among these, right? But all of these parts are ordered to one end, which is sitting. Okay? And the reason why let's say the back of the chair comes into the seat at the angle it does is because of what?
Our body.
A sitting, right? Right? I mean, why doesn't it come in at an acute angle? You know, we have more back problems than I do, right? Okay? And even why does it come in maybe at a slightly obtuse angle, right? Rather than a right angle? Well, you can see, huh? And the more able to repose in a chair, right? Gives it a little bit obtuse, right? It's too much obtuse, I mean, you tend to fall asleep, you know, with those archaeologists, you know, or something like that. But, so the order of them among themselves is an account of what? The order of all of them to their end. Huh? The same way in a basketball team or even in an army, right? Huh? The order of the parts to each other is an account of the order of the basketball team to winning the game, right? Or the order of the army to victory over the enemy, right? Okay? Okay? So the order to the end is what's most important. All the other orders depend upon that, right? Okay? Now, the end of philosophy is by what? By nature. Okay? So, say the end of philosophy is by nature. Now, when I say by nature, I don't mean that nature is enough to get to the end, because you have to use your reason, right? And think out all these things, right? Okay. But what is the end, in fact, right, is determined by nature. And you saw that especially when we say that wonder is the beginning of philosophy, right? Because wonder is the beginning of philosophy, the end of philosophy had to be what? A knowledge of first cause, right? In other words, there's a connection between philosophy beginning in this natural desire to know the cause and the end of philosophy being a knowledge of the first cause. Okay? And that's why Plato or Socrates in that reading we had from the Theaetetus, right? He says, in a way to make you wonder and think, right? It wasn't a bad genealogy, but Hesiod said, right? when he said that Iris was the offspring of wonder. Huh? Iris, what's the meaning of that we saw?
Iris is the rainbow, and rainbow connects heaven and earth like a messenger.
Yeah. Iris is both of those. Huh? Iris is both the messenger of the gods, right? Okay. And therefore unites man with God, right? As messenger does, like an angel, right? And Iris is also the rainbow personified, which joins heaven and earth, in place of God and man, right? And even in the Old Testament, the rainbow is a symbol, right, of the union of man and God, the reconciliation there, right? So he's saying that it wasn't a bad genealogy to say that wonder unites man with God, right? But how does wonder unite man with God? Makes us look for the cause, right? And if the cause has a cause, for the cause of the cause, right? And so on until you get to the first cause, and the first cause turns out to be God. Therefore, wonder unites us ultimately with God on the side of our reasoning, right? Or again, from the natural road, right? The natural road, as we say, goes from the effect towards the cause, as we saw a few minutes ago, right? So the natural road is moving in the direction of wisdom. We saw that too when we saw that you went from sensing to memory to experience to art or science. You're moving in the direction of wisdom. So you see that the end here of philosophy is something that is by nature. And that the natural desire there, wonder especially, and the natural road are both going in the direction of the first cause. Yeah?
So why do we have conflicting philosophies?
Because we don't start from the natural beginnings, that's why. In fact, I'll come to that reason, Okay? Heraclitus talks about that a lot, okay? I'll come back to that. So, the end of philosophy is by nature, and the order of things to their end is the reason for all the other order in them. Right? So if you don't start from the natural beginnings of philosophy, you don't know what the end of philosophy is. And that's the basis for all of the order in philosophy. So the whole thing is cast into what? Chaos, right? Because you weren't wise enough to begin from the what? Natural beginnings, yeah? Okay? Now, Heraclitus, he has a marvelous fragrance here, which I'll give you a copy of that. But the natural is what is common, right? Okay? Heraclitus has some marvelous fragrance there dealing with this. The first one is this. He says, we should not act and speak like those asleep. Now when I quote this fragment, Heraclitus, we should not act and speak like those asleep. Most people say, yeah, that seems to make sense, right? But not exactly sure of all that it means, though, right? We often say to students, wake up, Okay? We should not act and speak like those asleep, right? Now, there's an obvious sense here that the man who's asleep is cut off from his senses, right? And if he's following anything, it's not his senses, but his imagination, right? So he's kind of cut off from the real world, right? Okay. But Heraclitus goes on in another fragment to bring out something else. He says, for the waking, he says, there's one world. And it's common, right? But when men fall asleep, each enters into his own what? Private world, right? His own dreams, right? Okay. So he's saying something else, right? That those who follow what is private are like those who are what? Asleep, right? Okay. See, we're all awake now at this table here, right? And we all know we're around this table, right? Okay. Well, if we all fell asleep, we might dream or in chapel or we're at home or whatever, right? You know? And these many private views we have in our dreams, right, could all be false, right? See? Okay? No, this is connected with truth and falsity, huh? Because 2 plus 2 is 4. There's one true answer, right? But how many false answers to them, right? Okay. Then Heraclitus goes on, he says, therefore we ought to follow what is common, right? But the many live as if they had a wisdom of their own, a private wisdom, huh? Okay. Now, if you stop and think about this, this is the only way for the human mind, really, to go forward, is to follow what is common. Huh? Okay. Now, let me show that, inductively here, how this is. Sometimes we go forward in our knowledge with the teacher and the students, right? Okay. And sometimes we go forward more like equals when we're discussing something, right? Okay. Now, is it possible for the teacher to lead the students forward without following the common? What the teacher does, if he's a good teacher, is he takes things that the student already knows, right? And he helps the student to put those things together and see something new that he hadn't seen before. Okay? And of course, Socrates in the famous dialogue, the Meno, when he does this with the slave boy, and Socrates says afterwards the slave boy knew it all along. And actually the slave boy didn't know how to double a square. In fact, he was mistaken, right? But the way to double a square comes out of the slave boy's answers. Okay? But now, if the teacher doesn't know those same things, can he lead the student? See? So there's no way that the teacher can fully, lead the student forward in his knowledge and not just say, believe me, because I'm the teacher. The only way he can do so is by helping the student to use what the student knows already, right? To see something that maybe the teacher sees and the student doesn't yet see, right? But the teacher obviously has to know those very things that he's going to what? Lead the student from, right? They have to be common to him and the what? Student. Yeah. Okay. And so as you go through, say, geometry, right? You come to a new theorem, and Euclid knows that new theorem, you don't. But he leads you to see that new theorem through things that you've learned already, right? And know already. Like the axioms and the postulates and the definitions and the theorems you've done already, right? But he helps you to put together what you know already to see the new theorem. Okay? Okay? Just like I was putting things together to help you see that the diameter had to bisect the circle, right? Okay? You see that? So there's no way the teacher can really lead the student forward in knowing and not just in believing, right? Without on the basis of what is common to the student and the teacher.
So that's why you had problems with Heidegger.
Yeah.
He wasn't saying what was common to...
Yeah. So the teacher, right, to things that both he and the student sees, right, he leads the student to see something the student at first didn't see, right? Okay? Because he has to maybe brought these things together and see what follows from them. Okay? Now, the other way of proceeding is where two people are more or less equal, right? And it's not clear that one knows like the teacher knows and the student doesn't know, right? Okay? And we're trying to put our two heads together in order to go further, right? Now, when we think about it, neither one of us really, fully knows what we're talking about, right? We're kind of, two heads are better than one. We're putting our heads together. We're going to be guessing and so on, right? And there's going to be some, disagreement, right? Okay? Now, I can say, well, you're mistaken because I'm right. And you can return the compliment and say, no, you're mistaken because I'm right. But is this going to bring us forward? No. the only way we can really go forward is for us to find something, right, that we both know and agree about, right, from which we can, what, separate my opinion or your opinion as one is being true and one is being false, right? See? In other words, I can't, if I say you're mistaken on the basis of what is private to my thinking, right, and you say that I'm mistaken on the basis of what is private to your thinking, in no way can we go forward in our thinking, can we? Okay? But if we can come back to something that we both have in common, right, and use that to decide where we disagree, right, then we can go forward, right? See? Now you'll see in the first book of Aristotle's Physics, right, that when he disagrees at one point with Plato, right, he goes back to a common understanding that he and Plato share. And from that he reasons, right, that in this place where they disagree, he's right and Plato's wrong, right? Okay? But that's the only way to what? Go forward in, okay? So whether you're going forward as a teacher tries to lead the students forward, right, or you're going forward in the discussion more between equals, right, in both cases you must base yourself on the common, right? Okay? Now, it's best if there's something actually common to the two of you, right? Okay? And in the conversation between Socrates and the slave boy, right? The slave boy is at first mistaken as to how to double a square. He thinks you double the what? Side, right? And actually if you double the sides, you get a square 4 times as big. And Socrates knows the truth, that you take the diagonal, right? Okay? But both in showing the slave boy that he's mistaken in his first thinking, right? And later on, in bringing the slave boy to see that the diagonal would be the side of a square twice as big, right? In both, Socrates proceeds from the answers of the slave boy, from things that the slave boy does in fact know, and which Socrates also knows. See? The only way of going forward, huh? See, unless you're just going to demand your belief, kind of blind belief. Okay? So in that case, that from which Socrates can show the slave boy that he's mistaken, and Socrates is right, is actually common to him and the slave boy, right? And in general, this is true in philosophy, at least at the beginning, right? You start from what is actually common, huh? That's the only way to go forward. Now, when you get into what we call experimental science, which is not as certain, there you can't proceed from something that is actually common because even the experiments are never common, even to scientists. Okay? Okay? But they try to follow Heraclitus so far as possible, right? And Schrödinger, for example, the author of the Schrödinger equation in modern physics, right? But the man who perfected the mathematics of wave mechanics, famous physicist. But he says, the first and indispensable condition we demand of an experiment is that it be repeatable with the same results. If an experiment cannot be repeated with the same results, we don't consider that experiment worthy of scientific consideration. So Professor Berquist in his lab, conducts an experiment and he announces to the world the results of it, right? But no one can duplicate that experiment and get the same results as Berquist. We will not give any what? Yeah, see? And the fact that the experiment can be repeated with the same results, right, is a sign that it's able to be common, right? Which is the best we can do in science. Huh? Okay. So when Louis de Broglie, proposed the idea of wave mechanics, and this is so unusual and contrary to the customary ideas that they're making a joke out of it, right? Being there's a Frenchman, they're calling it la comédie française, the French national comedy. But fortunately, Einstein at the time had great prestige, and he said, just a minute now, there might be something what Louis says, right? And so they conduct an experiment where Louis' theory predicted what would take place, right? And the experiments were performed in the Bell Telephone laboratories in New York, right? And exactly what he predicted came out. And then they repeated the experiments in Europe. The same results, right? That was the beginning of accepting that Louis' theory, right? You see? But notice, if two scientists disagree, and I have one hypothesis, and you have another hypothesis, and I say, well, you're wrong, because my hypothesis is correct, and you return the compliment and say, no, you're wrong. See? The only way to go forward is for you and I, to find an experiment we can both perform or both observe, right? An experiment in which my hypothesis would predict something differently than your hypothesis, right? And then we can decide, right? See? So whether you're in philosophy or in science, the only way to go forward is to follow what is common. Okay? Now, nothing is more common than the what? Natural, right? The customary or the fashionable or the chance event or the even choice, right? They're going to differ, right? Huh? So if you're going to follow what is common, you've got to follow what is natural. That's the only way to go forward. Otherwise, you're going to have a private philosophy, an idiotic. The Greek word private is idios. We get the word idiot. An idiot lives in his own world, right? His own private world, right? Which is not the true world, right? So you end up with a private philosophy. So those philosophers who do not follow what is common, right? Who do not follow what is natural, they're like men who are asleep, each were imagining his own what? Starting point. Huh? Okay? So you go to, say, the modern philosophers in a general way, and read each modern philosopher, you might get the impression that philosophy could begin anywhere and go anywhere and end up anywhere, right? In other words, you can't say anything about it. It's nothing, right? Okay. So this is another reason then, right? Huh?
Could you repeat the quote of Heraclitus, especially the second part?
Yeah, well, I've got it in here. I'm going to,
okay,
the these are their quotes right here.
Okay, great.
And then I got the Greek
Okay,
down
great.
below there,
Thank you.
We should not act and speak like those asleep. For the waking there is one world and it is common. But when men sleep, each one turns aside into a private world. Therefore we ought to follow what is common. Although reason is common to all, the many live as if having a private wisdom. And he goes on to say, those who speak with understanding must be strong in what is common to all. And that makes a very interesting comparison. As much as a city is strong in its law, okay? So just as life together in the city is impossible without a common law, right? So the life of the mind, whether it be between teacher and student or between equals in conversation, is impossible without some common basis, some common understanding. But notice he goes on, as much as a city is strong in its law, and even more so, for all human laws, meaning the laws of the city, are fed by one divine law, the natural law, which governs as far as it wishes and is more than sufficient for all, right? So the divine law, the natural law, like, don't murder, right? Huh? Don't kill innocent life and so on. Huh? That feeds the law about the speed limit in the city, right? On the highway, right? And it feeds the law about not shooting your gun off, right? And every time they invent something, that threatens life, right? Or could threaten life, right? It gives birth to other laws, right? So eventually go back to the natural, right? Okay. So this is another reason then, right? So we have to follow what is common. That's the only way we can move forward. Right? That's because men don't understand that and follow the common, that you have more disagreement, right? Than is what? Inevitable, right? Okay. There's always going to be some disagreement, right? But as you come back, you can only resolve the disagreement by going back to the common, right? And it's by departing from the common that you start to get something private, right? Okay, you follow imagination, huh? Just give one more here. Huh? In coming into philosophy from its natural beginnings, you're introduced into a consideration of everything that is necessary to be a good philosopher. Now, what do I mean by that? See? Well, when you talk about these natural desires, right, you see that the disposition of a man's will, right, a good disposition of his will and even of his emotions is necessary for philosophy, right? And are there other dispositions of will or emotion that are necessary besides wonder and desire to live well? Yeah. And one of them, of course, is the love of wisdom. The love of wisdom is not the same thing as wonder. I gave a talk one time on just the difference between those two. Okay? Or humility, right? Is humility necessary in a philosopher? And the great philosopher there, Berquist, right? He says, men don't live very long, and they've seen a part of life, but they boast of having seen the whole. And boasting is one of the species of pride there that Gregory talks about. And this is part of where the disagreement among men come, right? That it's natural for a man to see a part of the truth before he sees the whole, right? But out of pride, he boasts that he's seen the whole. And you can see that in the thinkers, right? I mean, like in the 19th century, to take an example of that. Along comes a man named Karl Marx, and he says, everything can be explained by the economic mode of production. Society, and everything can be explained by that, right? Undoubtedly, there's some things that are explained by the economic mode of production. Some things are explained by sexual drive and so on, right? But maybe having seen a part of the truth, they boast that they've seen the what? The whole, see? So maybe humility is necessary in the philosopher, right? Okay. In the great dialogue of the Phaedo, Socrates shows that they're discussing whether the soul is immortal or not, right? And it's a very difficult discussion, right? What you see is that it's not enough to want to know whether the soul is immortal. You can easily get discouraged in the investigation and even despair of finding the truth, right? And so you need this hope of finding the truth, right? You need this perseverance in the face of difficulty, right? That strength of will, right? To persist, right? But Socrates often, and there he talks about it a little bit too, but more in other dialogues, that you need this fear, though, of being mistaken. The fear of making a mistake, right? My greatest teacher there, Monsignor Dion, one guy said to me, his principal passion is fear. I mentioned the time when I was doing my doctoral thesis under him, and he made a suggestion, that really was all I needed to write the thesis by myself. And when he made it, I could see right away it was good. It fell into place. We have the evidence, he says. But with Monsignor, if he presented a new idea, his first reaction was to reject it, and you really have to. But it was very good because, he was so rigorous there, And when I was first starting out, I think Monsignor would have been a bad man for me. Because I would have been, terrified almost going forward, right? But I need somebody, my teacher, would encourage you to read things, and so on, right? And so sometimes, there's all kinds of dispositions of the will, in addition to these natural ones, wonder, the desire to live well, right? There's necessary that hope of perseverance, right? Necessary that fear of mistake, right? Love of wisdom is necessary. Humility is very necessary, right? Pride is the chief cause of deception on the part of the will, right? And in looking at these natural beginnings, among which are the natural desires, right? You're introduced to thinking about the fact that what are the dispositions of will and emotion necessary to be a philosopher? Mildness, right? People get into discussion, they often get angry with each other because you don't see my point, or I don't think you're being fair, or something like that. And anger often gets in the way. It just, in the dialogue, right? People get angry and they kind of clouds their vision, right? Huh? And sometimes you get angry, and then the next day you calm down, you see the other guy's point, and you come back or something, But I mean, so there's all kinds of dispositions of the will and emotion that are necessary for the philosopher, right? And in beginning with the natural desires, you're being introduced, right, to the dispositions of will that are what? Necessary to be a philosopher, right? When I go into a class, how many students do there really have that wonder? That's, our civilization tends to kill wonder, right? Yeah. If you study the customs of the modern world, they're opposed to wonder, really. As de Tocqueville says, democratic customs are opposed to wonder. They're opposed to the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. Heisenberg says modern science is opposed to wonder. Customs there. If you ever talk about the customs, I'll show you that. But so you say, well, gee whiz. But if I have a student who has this wonder, maybe he gets discouraged, right, by the disagreement among philosophers, right, or gets discouraged by the difficulty, all the things he has to go through, and so on, right. Now, likewise, when you talk about the natural road, right, and you say, well, are there other roads besides the natural road that you need to know, right? And that introduces you to the whole question of these three roads I talked about, right? There's a natural road in our knowledge, and then there's the road of reason as reason, the road from reasonable guesses to reasoned out knowledge, common road of reasoned out knowledge. And then each reasoned out knowledge has, to some extent, its own road, right? See? So you're being introduced to the roads that are necessary, right, to be a good philosopher, by considering this natural begetting that is a road, right? You see that? Okay. And likewise, when you talk about the natural beginning in the sense of the statements known to themselves by all men, these axioms, right? Are there other statements known to themselves that are beginnings too? And it's the famous Berquist who made the distinction between the statements known to themselves by all men and the statements known to themselves by those who are wise in some science. See? Give an example of what I mean. Is a perfect number a composite number? What would you say? Is a perfect number a composite number? Obviously it is. But you have to know what a perfect number is, right? A perfect number in arithmetic, it's a number that is equal to the sum of everything that measures it. So the first perfect number is what? 6, right? 6 is measured by 1, by 2, and by 3, but not by 4 or 5. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6, right? 4 is not a perfect number. It's measured by 1 and by 2, not by 3. And 1 plus 2 don't add up to 4, right? Okay. So, if you know what a perfect number is, it's going to have to be measured by some other number besides 1, right? Okay, because 1 times it's going to add up with it. Okay? So it's got to be a composite number, obviously, right? And a number that's measured by some other number, not just by 1. Okay? But you see, I'm a man learned, a little bit learned, right, in arithmetic, right? So most students don't know what a perfect number is, right? But if you know what a perfect number is, then it's obvious that a perfect number is a what? Composite number, yeah. Okay. You see that? Okay. So what Berquist actually says, it's per se known, right? Per se notum, sapientibus, right? But meaning not sapientibus necessarily in the full sense of being wise, but per se known to itself, right? By those who are learned in some science, right? You see what I mean? See? But everybody knows what a whole and a part is. You can't live without, you can't eat or drink without experiencing whole and a part, right? But you can go through life without learning about what a perfect number is. So that every perfect number is a composite number is known to itself by the wise, right? Or by the learned in geometry, arithmetic. But the whole is more than a part is known to itself by all men. See? So in studying those axioms, those statements known to themselves by all men, you're being led into the general consideration of what statements known to themselves. Because they're the foundation of all reasoned out knowledge. Now, are there other statements known to themselves besides those naturally known? Are there other roads in our knowledge besides the natural road? Right? Are there other dispositions of will and emotions necessary to be a good philosopher besides those natural desires of wonder and the desire to live well? You had a question you're going to ask?
No, just as an observation, I was thinking of in terms of applying this to theology, and just seeing all the problems we've had in the beginning of the church, all the sects and the breakups and everything, because people have chosen to go off with their private understanding or their biased perspective on their understanding of God and God's Reformation. And I just think of the built-in sensus fidei, the sense of the people, the common sense that God gives to the church, is a protection even against maybe the greatest cardinals that could still go off base if they're not touched with.
Sure.
So you see that analogy.
The word heretic comes from the word chosen, right? The heretic, he chooses what he's going to believe, right? Rather than following the common faith. But there's always a common way there, right? And then each of the guys goes off in his private way, right? Private interpretation, right? Private thought. Okay? So, now we've seen a little bit of what the natural beginnings of philosophy are and why we should come into philosophy from its natural beginnings, right? Okay. And reason. I got some of those reasons, most of them in there. So.
Good.
Now we come to the second part of how we should come into philosophy, right? We should come into philosophy from its natural beginnings through the use of reason, right? Okay. And we're talking about reason now as reason. Huh? We're not talking about reason insofar as it naturally knows something, because that's already brought into the natural beginnings. And for this purpose, I like to use that Shakespeare, right? I like to use Shakespeare's exhortation to use reason, right? Okay. Now, let's talk about it in kind of a general way today. I'm going to give you, questions for understanding Shakespeare's exhortation, right? Okay. But make sure we don't miss anything, right? Okay. Let's look at the exhortation kind of generally here. Huh? Now, the exhortation is written in what is called blank verse, okay, which is the accepted term now for this kind of verse. It's very common in Shakespeare's tragedies, right? Shakespeare makes fun of the term, but okay. Now, what is blank verse? Do you know?
It doesn't rhyme.
Unrhymed.
It's unrhymed, iambic pentameter. Okay. It's unrhymed. Iambic pentameter. Now, what's an iamb?
5 syllables.
Well, pentameter is 5. Iamb means what?
remember if it's short, long, or long, short. I think it's or the accent. I'm sorry, accent on the second. Huh?
Yeah, it's two syllables with the accent on the second, right? Okay. That's the most common meter also that we sometimes fall into in daily life, right? It's closer to daily speech, right? Okay. If you want a little mnemonic device that I thought of years ago for the four main meters, my little mnemonic device is add. Okay. I got to remember where the accent goes, right? So you have two basic ones. In the iambic and the trochaic, you have
the second.
two syllables. It's like the word it has two letters, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the anapest and the dactylic, you have three syllables. Okay? Those are the four main meters, huh? Iambic, trochaic, anapestic, and dactylic. Okay? But here, you have two syllables, right? Here you have three syllables, that's what I remember. Okay? Iambic and trochaic have two syllables, right? Okay. Now, if you remember what the iambic is, you can remember all the rest. Because the iambic, you have two syllables with the accent on the second syllable. Trochaic, you have two syllables with the accent on the what? First syllable, right? In dactylic, you have what? Three syllables with the accent on the what? First line, anapest is the reverse, right? Okay? Anapest would be the last one, yeah. Dactylic would be this. Now, but as I say, I'm trying to teach, posted here, so that's my device. Now, the iambic meter, as I say, we sometimes fall into it in daily speech, right? And in speeches, they'll sometimes use a little bit of iambic meter. 7 years ago, like Gettysburg Address, that's in iambic meter, right? 7 years, right?
Oh.
Or when Roosevelt said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself."
Oh.
That's iambic meter, right?
Huh.
Okay. So it's the most natural one, right? And the thing they notice in Shakespeare is you often use the trochaic meter for witches or fairies. Huh?
Uh-huh.
Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog in filthy air. That's what you mean trochaic meter, right? So, okay. Something kind of mysterious about that, right? Thomas used to use that rotate devotee, since he used the trochaic a bit, right? Something very mysterious, the Eucharist.
What did you say?
Thomas in the other rotate devotee, some of it seems to be in the trochaic meter.
Huh.
Okay. So, now pentameter means you have what? 5 items. So we get to the pentagon. Pentagon, right? Okay. Okay, the 10-syllable line then, right? With the accents on the second, the fourth, the sixth, the eighth, and the 10th, right? Now occasionally, the poet will vary things, right? To avoid monotony and so on. But I mean, that's basically what you're doing, right? 10-syllable lines with the accents on the even number, right? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, right? Okay. But they're unrhymed, right? Okay. Now in Shakespeare's sonnets, you have what? Iambic pentameter, right? Okay. But the first and the third line rhymes, and the second and the fourth rhyme, right? In each of the 3 couplets, or quartets rather, and the couplet at the end, they rhyme, right? Okay. But this is more like daily speech, right? Okay. So it's written in unrhymed iambic pentameter, right? Now, the exhortation is on 7 lines, but the first line begins on the what? 7th syllable, and the 7th line ends on the what?
6.
6, yeah. So you have the equivalent of 6 lines of iambic pentameter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't, arrange it in 6 lines. Right? You got to keep them in 7 lines. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now that's all. That's kind of extrinsic to what we're
Mhm.
concerned with here, just so you kind of
Mhm.
see the structure, right? Okay. I want to play around with the numbers there. It starts on the 7, which is a symbol of wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ends on 6, which is a perfect number, right?
Mhm.
That may be pretty accidental, right?
Mm-hmm. That's why they're playing around.
And it's got it on 7 lines, which is a symbol of wisdom, right? And there's exactly 49 words in there, which is 7 times 7. Aristotle says intellect is best, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for the Pythagoreans among us, or Straussians among us, that's what I see numbers, right? I have to put those things out, right? But it's purely accidental, right? Okay. Do you ever know, some of these poets are, But Shakespeare's the master of the English language. He's like, it's got commanded English the way he does. Huh? And apparently his vocabulary is huge.
Right.
I mean, I've heard the numbers and I forget them now. I mean, it's incredible, Shakespeare's vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly ever any man ever had the vocabulary he had.
Mm.
Incredible. They have such an understanding of these words and a feel for them, right? Okay. Now, you might divide the exhortation into 2 parts, right? Oh, you don't have one, do you? Huh? No? Okay. And the first part is the lines. Here, you can. This other one is with questions, but I'm not going to the questions today. The meter, the things on the top here. The first part, he says, what is a man if his chief good, right, and market of his time be but to sleep and feed, a beast no more? Okay. Now, that is based upon a proportion, a likeness of ratios. Okay. And in a way, you can reason from this proportion in a way like the mathematician does. Huh? Now, if a mathematician, for example, just use letters here, if he can see that A is to B as X is to Y, if he can see a proportion, right, that A is to B as X is to Y, he can reason from this proportion in some very obvious ways. If A is equal to B, then X is what?
Equal to 1.
Yeah. If A is more than B, then X is more than Y. And if less, less, right? Okay. Now Shakespeare is going to reason, right? In that way, right? And you can argue this way in terms of better. What is proportion to a line, Shakespeare?
Line jumped in my head, but is that what you meant when you were speaking about how the natures of things are like numbers?
That comes out when he says more,
Proportions.
no more.
Oh, okay.
Because numbers are said to be more or less, right? Okay. Now, what's the proportion underlying here, right? Well, you could say that the chief good of man is the man as the chief good of the beast is the what?
The beast.
Yeah. Okay. And the fact that you can supply the 4th term is a sign that you see a proportion, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see a likeness of the ratios, right? Okay. But now, instead of using the phrase chief good of the beast, which would be too pedantic, like me, right? He says to sleep and feed, right? Okay? As if that seems to be the chief good of the beast, right? Okay. We had this beast around the house, Moppet, this cat, the moppet seems to sleep and feed, and she purrs when she sleeps, and she purrs when she gets her food, and that seems to be her chief good, right? Okay? So, it'd be more clear if you use the word chief good of the beast, but I mean, Shakespeare says to sleep and feed, right? Okay? That's the chief good of the beast. Now, you can now, what? Alternate the proportion, right? Like in math, if you, in math, 2 is to 3 is 4 is to 6. Then the first is to the third, as the second is to the what? Fourth, right? You can alternate the proportion here now and say now, the chief good of man is to chief good of the beast, to sleep and feed, as man is to the what? Beast. Okay? See that? Okay. Now, you've got to reason a bit like, with the rigor of math, right? Once you know that A is to B as X is to Y in math, if A is no more than B, then X is no more than Y, right? So if the chief good of man is no more than the chief good of the beast, to sleep and feed, then man is no more than a what? Beast, right? Okay? Okay. Now, which is more known to us? That man is more than a beast, or if the chief good of man is more than to sleep and feed? Which is more known to us?
Man is more than a beast.
Yeah, yeah. Because you will run into men who live for nothing more than to sleep and feed and maybe sexual pleasure, right? Okay, they see nothing more than the beast, right? But if you put them in a cage, you treat them like an animal, they would protest, right? See? So it's more known, it seems, that man is more than a beast, right? And that his chief good is more than the good of the beast, right? But then you can reason, right? You can reason in either way. You can say, if man is more than a beast, then the chief good of man must be more than the chief good of the beast. Or you could argue that way around, and then say man is more than the beast, therefore, right? Or you could argue that way around and say, if the chief good of man is no more than the chief good of the beast, to sleep and feed, then man is no more than a beast, but man is more than a beast, therefore this can't simply be no more than that, right? Okay? Now notice you're seeing there that there's a necessary connection between what man is and what the chief good of man is. It's determined by the very nature of man, what he is. And between the beast and what the chief good of the beast is, right? Okay? Now, notice Shakespeare's phrase there. What is a man if his chief good and market of his time, right? Okay? Now, chief good means the greatest good, right? Mm-hmm. But he identifies that with the market of his time, right? Mm-hmm. Now, market could be taken in the sense of the end or the goal, right? And what Shakespeare is seeing there is what Aristotle saw before him, that the good and the end are basically the same thing. The good of a thing is its end or purpose, and vice versa. Okay? The top of the Mark Hopkins Hotel used to be a dance band, and they're called the Marksmen. And just that's what because they were the hotel, it's a famous hotel, Mark Hopkins there, the Marksmen. But notice the Marksman is the man who aims at the what? Target, right? Yeah. And this is Aristotle, when he talks about the end of man, he talks about the scopus, the target, right? That you're aiming at, right? So he's seen that the chief good of man and the market or end of his life, right, are the same, right? It's very profound. He sees that. Now notice, when he says market of his time, he means time there is a what? Metonym for the life of man. Okay? Now, do you all know what a metonym is? Metonym is the name of one of the figures of speech, like metaphor, irony, and so on. And in metonym, what you do is give the name of the container to the contained or vice versa. So since my life is contained or measured by time, right? Time is used as a metonym for my life. Right? Okay. Now it's very profound that Shakespeare uses time as a metonym for our life more than he would use for the beast, right? Because there's a sense in which man lives in time more than any other thing in this world. Because he's always looking before and after. The first meaning of before and after is in time, right? And you're always planning your day, your week, your life, right? Raging events in time, right? In the third book about the soul, there Aristotle says, man is the animal who has a sense of time. Okay? So man has history and biography and so on, right? Okay? And if he's suffering from amnesia, you're in trouble, right? The thread of your life is broken, right? So the market of his time is the end or purpose of his life, right? Time being a metonym for his life. And that's the same as the chief good of man, right? Okay. So, basically then, he's reasoning on the basis of this proportion, right? Now in the second part of the exhortation, he's going to say what it is that man has more than the beast, right? And that will be reason, right? And therefore, you can kind of guess that man's chief good is going to involve reason, right? But it's in ethics that we see what use of reason is really our chief good, right? Okay. Now, notice the strength of this argument, right? And again, it is similar to mathematics, right? What is a 3 if it be half of 4? What is a 3 if it be half of 4? A 2 or more, right? You see? Right? See how profound it is, right? Half of 4 is to 2, as half of 6 is to 3, right? So what is a 3 if it be half of 4? A 2 no more. But obviously 3 is more than 2, right? Okay. Okay. Well, Shakespeare's saying something like that, right? Huh? The chief good of man is to man, right? Like half of 6 is to 3. And the chief good of the beast is to the beast, like half of 4 is to 2, right? So it's absurd to say that 3 is no more than half of 4. In that case, it would be no more than 2. Right? But there you see the likeness between numbers and things, right? Okay. So, if you add to body, life, you get a plant, right? And you add to body and life, sense, you get a what? Animal, right? And you add to body, life, and sense, reason, and you get a what? Man. You subtract reason from a man, you have nothing but an animal, right? Subtract sensation from an animal, you have nothing but a plant. And subtract life from the plant, you have nothing but a body, right? Okay? So the natures of things are like what? Numbers, right? And you add or subtract the 1 and you have a different number, right? You add or subtract a difference and you have another what? Kind of thing, right? Huh? Okay? You add reason to animal and you got no longer an animal in the sense of a beast, right? Okay? A beast is just an animal, right? 3 is not just 2 though, is it? It's 2 plus 1, right? So it gets a new name now. It's 3. It's no longer 2. Okay? As I say, even the man who regards the good of the beast as his chief good, right? He still thinks he's more than a beast, right? And he would be indignant if you said, well, let's put you in a cage, right, with the other animals. You know, or if we can save your life or the life of the dog, we'll flip a coin, right? If you're more than a beast, right? You see, he'd be indignant at this thing. But now, in the second part, he's going to say what it is that man has more than the beast. And that's going to be what? Reason, right? Okay. Now, Shakespeare has the elements here of a definition of reason. Huh? Okay. But what words there pertain to the definition of reason? Huh? What's the most basic word that he gives there that pertains to the definition of reason?
Discourse?
No.
The first, what's the first?
No.
Oh, looking.
Oh, before
No?
and after, looking before and after.
No.
Capability.
Huh? Capability, yeah. Notice, reason there is a capability, and I take the liberty of shortening it to ability, right? Okay. Why large discourse and looking before and after are not an ability, those are names of acts, right?
Oh.
Okay. But reason is an ability for some act, right? And so you define an ability for some act by saying it's an ability and then stating the act for which it is an ability. Okay? So, he's saying that reason is the ability for large discourse, looking before and after. I gave you the page in the senses of before, didn't I? Or did I?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So you should, consult that when we talk about that word. So this is Shakespeare's definition of reason. It's the ability for large discourse looking before and after. And this is, I think, the first definition, really, of reason as reason, right? Okay. Now, as we said before, the distinction between things is like numbers, right? And reason and nature are like the distinction there between 2 and 3. Reason has something of what nature has, but it's not just nature, right? Okay? Just like there's, in a way, there's a 2 and 3, right? But 3 is not just 2. It's something in addition, right? Okay? And so we can consider reason as a nature. There are some things that reason actually knows, right? There's a road that reason actually follows, right? Okay. But when we say you're defining reason as reason, we're talking about what reason has in addition to nature, right? Okay? Beyond nature, right? Okay? Just like we say 3 is not just 2, but it has 2 in it, right? But what's in addition, right? And it's by reason of what it has in addition that it's half of what? 6, let's say, right? Okay? So, now, in general, when you're talking about an ability, we always distinguish abilities by what they're for, right? An ability is never known by itself. I always give this example, right? The home example. Berquist goes down to the employment agency, right? Looking for a job, right? Okay. Guy's going to try to match me with the jobs that are available, right? Well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Huh? Well, I got ability. What's he got to say?
Do what?
Are you able to play the piano? You got a job here as a pianist, right? Are you able to, type 100 words a minute or something? You got a job as a typist, right? So the ability, right? It's got to be an ability for something, right? So how do you know that I have the ability, say, to walk?
By seeing you walk.
Yeah, you don't really see my ability to walk, do you? You see what I do through my ability to walk, right? How do you know someone has the ability to play the piano? You sit down, you see him playing the piano, right? You don't actually see his ability, you see what he does with his ability. You see the guy on the athletic field striking people out, and then your mind, grasps his ability, right? But through what he's doing, right? And we know that we have an ability through the act, which is ability, and that's how we distinguish one ability from another, right? Is the ability, for example, to walk and the ability to see, are they the same ability? Well, if walking was a form of seeing, maybe they would be, right? Or seeing is a form of walking, right? But if walking and seeing are really quite independent, right? Then it seems that the ability to walk and the ability to see must be something quite distinct, right? And it's possible, of course, is in that case, even to have a man having one ability, not the other, right? Okay? So the blind man can walk, and the man who's paralyzed can maybe see, right? Okay? But even before that, you might recognize that seeing is not a kind of walking, is it? See? And hearing is not a kind of seeing. And vice versa, right? So the ability to see and the ability to hear. So you have to know the existence of an ability and distinguish one ability from another, and then finally define an ability by what it's an ability for. So Shakespeare is going to define reason here. Ability is a genus, right? You're going to complete the definition by saying what the act for which it is an ability. Okay? Now the first word is discourse, right? Okay? Reason is the ability for discourse. Huh? Now, discourse maybe is not so familiar a word in English now, right? Discourse comes from the Latin word, right? For running. Okay? That's where you get the word course in English, right? Course, right? You're taking 5 courses in college, right? Sometimes. But it goes back to the idea of running, discourse. We speak of the current, not the current, but the current of the stream, right? Huh? Okay. And it's interesting the way that word is carried over. Huh? And see it maybe more clearly in English, the word course. Huh? One of our state documents says, when in the course of human events. Right?
It also has a circular form, if you will. The word course has a beginning and an end.
A race course might, yeah. Okay? But the idea that comes from the Latin word to run, right? Or to run from one place to another, right? Okay? But then we tend to carry the word run forward to not just the act of the legs, which it means originally, but to human action, right? And then we carry it over even to the movement of the mind, right? Okay? Now, let me take an example here, use an English word. You know this play, Romeo and Juliet, right? Okay. Now there's a young man in a great hurry there. His name is Romeo, right? And there's a wise old, Franciscan, right? And, the words he gives advice to Hamlet, to Romeo. He says, wisely and slow. They stumble that run fast. Okay? Wisely and slow. They stumble and fast. It's 10 syllables, right? Wisely and slow, that's 4. They stumble before they run fast, right? What does he mean when he says that to Romeo? Is he talking about running in the first sense of the word, running with his legs? Okay. It looks back to that, right? Because when a person runs up the stairs, sometimes you see your mother or someone they stumble, right? Or we stumble. What is he talking about here?
His course of action.
Yeah, like you would in the course of action, right? There it's applied to action in general, right? It was borrowed from the word to run, right? So it looks back to that first meaning of run, right? But now it has a sense of act in haste, repent at leisure, right? Mm-hmm. It's this morning, right? Wise and slow. Huh? But then finally we carry the word run over, and we sometimes apply it to the mind. Huh? Okay. And so you hear professors say sometimes, now, I'm going to run through this once more.
Yeah.
Right? Okay? And notice that the same with the Latin word course, right? You've got the race course where you're probably running with your legs, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have when in the course of human events, where you talk about the course of action, right? And sometimes I'll say, the tragedy is a likeness of a course of action that is such and such. Okay? But then we have, as I say, an assumption. The student normally takes 5 courses, right? A semester, right? Okay. So the mind is running or going from one thing to another, right? Okay? So discourse names an act of reason that is like a what?
Running.
Yeah, it's like a motion, right? It's going from one thing to another, right? Okay. Now, the nearest thing to that, though, is not running with your legs, right? Although we often borrow words from the legs, we talk about steps, right? First step, second step, right? It's not even running in the sense of action, right? But it's more like when I go to the art museum, right? And I look at one painting, and I look at another painting, and I look at another painting, right? Okay. Or I go to a concert, and I hear the first movement, and then the second movement, and I hear the third movement, right? And I hear the next piece, right? So, it's not only reason that goes from one thing to another, right? Even among our knowing powers, right? But my eyes can go from one thing to another, right? And look at you, and then look at you, right? See? Okay? And, we put our eyes over the figures in the columns and so on, right? Run down the page, right? You see that sometimes, right? Okay? But now there's another sense of discourse that presupposes that reason can go from one thing to another, right? But is the discourse that distinguishes reason from what the eyes do. Okay? And what is that discourse that distinguishes reason in its movement from the eye, going from one thing to another? So there's some similarity there, right? When a student takes a course, right, the professor shouldn't be talking about the same thing every day, right? He's going from one thing or one topic to another, maybe, right? Yeah? Okay. That's very much like being a museum and going from one painting to another, right? Okay. But there's a discourse that is peculiar to reason, right? And it's more than just going from one thing to another, right?
One thing through another.
Yeah. It's the ears of imagination have the ability to go from one thing to another, right? But reason is also able to come to know something through knowing other things. Huh? And the act, which is so characteristic of reason that it gets its name from reason, namely reasoning, right? In reasoning, you're coming to know one statement through what? Other statements. You're coming to know the conclusion through the premises, right? Okay? But in defining, you're coming to know one thing to another, right? One comes to know what blank verse is through unrhymed and iambic and what? Pentameter, right? One comes to know what an iamb is through syllable and accent and second and so on, right? Okay? So reason is the ability to know one thing through knowing other things. And that separates reason from senses. Because I don't see one painting through seeing another painting. I can look at you and then look at him, but I don't see him through seeing you. I can hear one movement, the first movement of Mozart's symphony, and then I can hear the second movement, right? But I don't hear the second movement through hearing the first movement. See? But when I define, I come to know what something is I didn't know before through things I know already. See? Now, I sometimes ask students, what is a perfect number, right? In arithmetic, they don't know, right? But they know what a number is, right? They know what it is to be what? Measured by something, right? Measured evenly, right? They know what it is to be what? Equal, right? And I put all these things together and I say it's a number that is equal to the sum of everything they measured there. Oh, that's what it is. Right? Okay? So they're coming to know what something is that they didn't know through things they did know already. Okay? So defining and reasoning are two kinds of what? Discourse, right? In the sense of what? Coming to know the unknown through the known, right? Counting and calculating are two other ways, right? When I count, I come to know a number through the one, right? When I calculate, add, subtract, multiply, divide, I come to know a number I didn't know through some numbers that I what? Didn't know, right? Huh? Okay. So what Shakespeare is telling us here, in the Middle Ages, sometimes discoursus was used as a synonym almost for reasoning, right? Okay. But if you want a discourse that separates reason from the eye and the ear and the imagination, which are the closest to it, right? The knowing powers, you'd have to say not only that reason is the ability to know one thing before or after another, even the senses can do that, right? But reason is the ability to what? Come to know something unknown, right? Through things that are what? Known. Yeah. And that's seen especially in reasoning, right? Which is so characteristic of reason that it's named for reason. Right? Reasoning is not just going from one statement to another, right? But it's coming to know a statement, which in logic we call the conclusion, right? Through at least two other statements, which are called the premises, right? Okay. Calculating is coming to know a number you didn't know, two numbers you did know, right? I get to the checkout counter in the grocery store, and I know the cost of everything I put into my basket, right? But I don't know yet the cost I have to pay, right? I could come to know that number by adding the numbers that I into my basket. My wife is very fast sometimes to be in there. See if she's got enough. Right? Okay? You see that? Okay. So that's the first thing. Now I think we're running short now, 5:20. We'll stop here. Yeah. So reason is the ability to come to know one thing through to another. Okay? I get to go on together. Okay. But as you think about it, I'll give you this other one which has a list of questions here. Okay. So we should be studying. Just a few of the things you can learn from this exhortation. Who else needs a copy?
You have a, sure. Do you want these?
Another copy on this? Okay. Another copy?
Yeah.
I'll keep one for myself so I can do it. We'll kind of explain the rest of the definition, then we'll start to go through these ones to make sure we pose questions, right? Okay? Okay. So, Deo gratias.